Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on April 28th. Can you believe it's April already? No, not April, the end of April. Oh my God. From Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to my website at KARMICEvolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. From there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show and or search the archived listings for past shows you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. The show drops every Friday now at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern, so you can listen then or anytime. And if you were looking for the show yesterday, Friday the 28th, there's been a small technological glitch, so it's actually posting on Saturday the 29th this week. But while you are there, whenever you go there to KARMICEvolution.com, you'll see above the most recently posted podcast show a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us, depending on our individual sun sign, actually needs to be happy. This is based on an interview I did with Steve a couple of years ago, and he's given me permission to distribute it more widely as a means of promoting the validity of astrology in our lives. And yes, it will sign you up for my weekly Conversations About Consciousness astrology newsletter, but you can, of course, unsubscribe anytime. And a quick note about that, I haven't been able to get a newsletter out for the last 2 weeks. There's been a lot going on in my life, a little bit of stressful stuff, so I've had a lot of personal business to take care of, and I apologize for not getting it out on a weekly basis. Sometimes I am a little erratic, but hey, I'm a Cancer moon, so I'm a moody person. Anyway, regardless, be sure to grab the freebie when you listen to this podcast, whether you do so live or after the fact. And do enjoy some words of astrological wisdom from Stephen Forrest. Now, separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page. It's Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can keep track of upcoming podcast content and other astro news you can use. I'm also posting on Instagram now, too, at karmic.evolution, so feel free to follow me there as well. But as I said last week, I'm a bit of a wordy person, so I can't get as much detail in on Instagram. So if you're on Facebook, still on Facebook, or want to go back to Facebook, depending on your age, stage, and preferences on social media platforms, by all means, check me out on Facebook as well. Now, finally, I'm offering still my discounted 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading, and that is for only $125. And this offer is for radio show listeners only. So if you're interested in astrology and you want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, and you'd like to use astrological insight to move from chaos to clarity about what might be holding you back from achieving your most cherished desires in your areas of greatest interest, be that your relationships, your career, your job, your finances, your health, then this is the reading for you. In this reading, we look at how the energies in which you entered into this lifetime may be keeping you stuck in old habitual behavioral patterns, or what I call conditioned behavior, and how this knowledge can assist you to make different, more positive choices moving forward. So if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness using astrological insight as your guide, well, that's easy when you take advantage of my special discounted offer at Karmic Evolution /Karmic125. As I like to say, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. All right, so let's get into this week's astro news you can use. The monthly lunar cycle's waxing now since last week's April 19th, 20th, depending on your time zone, Aries new moon solar eclipse showed us what was formerly hidden or eclipsed in our lives. So I'm now, given what's happened, which we'll get into in a minute, I'm calling this past week the post-Aries new moon solar APOC-ECLIPSE. Remember, I told you that the themes of this set of eclipses, the spring eclipses of 2023, and we're headed now during the monthly waxing lunar cycle into the May 5th Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, which will occur at 14 degrees and 58 minutes of the Scorpio-Taurus polarity and at 10:34 a.m. Pacific time and 1:34 p.m. Eastern time. Again, that's on May 5th. As per traditional astrologer Bernadette Brady is, and I quote, "This set of eclipses is a very sensual family of eclipses, ranging from sudden sexual passions and lust to birth and procreative drives. This series is not subtle and can catch people off guard and confront them with their own very deep passion, which may have been hidden for many years." End quote. Now, I'd mentioned last week how interesting it was that Donald Trump is involved currently in a defamation case that stems from E. Jean Carroll's accusation of rape, which dates back to a New York City Bergdorf Goodman store dressing room in the spring of 1996. And I'd say that it makes sense that this case relates to Trump's, quote, sudden sexual passions coming home to roost. I mean, eclipses always occur within a certain proximity to the transiting nodal axis. And the nodal axis is always considered karmic in nature. So, some karmic chickens related to sudden sexual passions, as I said, are coming home to roost for him. Now, in our individual natal charts, the South Node designates the energies into which our soul chose to be born from past lifetimes, like I said before, meaning we bring a lot of habitual behavior with us from the past, while the North Node shows us our North Star, or the direction in which our soul should progress should we want to consciously move forward toward our highest destiny throughout this particular lifetime. Now, also related to this eclipse, which right before showed us the settlement of the Dominion voting system's lawsuit against Fox News, right, which was an agreed upon huge number of, a little less than $250 million, less than $1 billion. So it was $787.5 million settlement. And that less than or actually about a week later, that we got the news of Tucker Carlson's firing. Now, so the settlement was made on April 18th, and the firing occurred on April 23rd. Now, again, I've already discussed how the themes of, and this was last week and the week before, the themes of any series of eclipses may begin to rise into collective consciousness starting about 3 weeks prior. This is something that many reputable astrologers agree on, those who have studied it closely, such as Bill Meridian, who wrote the book The Predictive Power of Eclipse Paths, published in January 2020. And I remember him lecturing on this topic, and I remember that specifically, that piece of information, when he lectured for the Astrological Society of Princeton back around that time. So let's look at what happened as, again, we approach the April 19th or 20th solar eclipse that fit this eclipse series themes, which I've discussed. But first, let's remember that we know one of the dominant aspects from this past Aries, and this was the second Aries new moon, which I went into in detail last week, solar eclipse, was that both luminaries were square or waxing into squares to Pluto in Aquarius. So the moon square Pluto, when it forms in the sky, or it formed in the sky on the day we were born, so it's in our natal chart, means that we may act compulsively based on sudden urges and impulses. While the sun square to Pluto, and bear in mind this is it wasn't a fixed square actually, because the eclipse happened at 2950 of Aries, and they squared out of sign Pluto at 1 degree Aquarius, but both the moon and the sun moved on into Taurus to create fixed exact squares to Pluto. And so the sun square to Pluto didn't perfect until just after the eclipse on April 20th, but that aspect pits us against both inner and outer pressures, particularly opposition from those in positions of authority. And we also know that Pluto's archetypal meaning, in addition to representing issues archetypally around sex and sexuality, and let's think in the current context of lust and gender here, also covers joint resources and other people's money. So we had the story that broke about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, and then another, leading up to and beyond this last solar eclipse on April 1920th, showing us how much a billionaire's financial largesse toward Thomas helped him supplement his $265,000 annual salary. I might be inaccurate. That was I don't remember, it was 265 or 285, and I didn't fact check, so it's somewhere between the two. And as previously noted, first it was revealed that Thomas and his wife Ginny took all expense-paid vacations on billionaire Harlan Crow's dime, the guy who keeps the statues of dictators and authoritarian figures in his backyard and collects Nazi memorabilia. And then we learned that Crow had purchased Thomas's mother's house, for which Thomas held the deed, a portion of the deed, along with his mother and his brother. And along with that, we learned that his mother lives rent-free in this billionaire's owned house, to which he made thousands of dollars of upgrades. We also know that Thomas failed to disclose the buyer on his tax forms, just as he failed to disclose one year that he also neglected, I said 1 year. He also failed, he neglected to report his wife Ginny's $685,000 worth of income from 2003 through 2007. And according to a website called Above the Law, and I quote, between 2003 and 2007, Virginia Thomas, a longtime conservative activist, earned $686,589 from the Heritage Foundation, according to a Common Cause review of the foundation's IRS records. Thomas failed to note the income in his Supreme Court financial disclosure forms for those years, instead checking a box labeled none, where spousal non-investment income would be disclosed. In his 2009 disclosure, Justice Thomas also reported spousal income as none. Common Cause contends that Liberty Central paid Virginia Thomas an unknown salary that year. And then we have this, according to Wikipedia, about Liberty Central. Quote, Liberty Central was a nonprofit conservative political advocacy group founded in 2009 by Virginia Thomas, the wife of U.S. Supreme Court Associate Justice Clarence Thomas, and Leonard Leo. Virginia Thomas was the president and CEO, and the group ceased operations in 2012. End quote. So now my somewhat rhetorical question is this. Do you think that this unsubtle series of eclipses is not anyway, do you think that this unsubtle series is of current eclipses which, quote, can catch people off guard and confront them with their own very deep passion, which may have been hidden for years, means that Clarence Thomas was unaware that he had a deep passion for lying about his income on his tax returns? And that because of his own hubris, he believed he was above the law when it comes to making such tax disclosures. Puh, that's for the regular people, the kind who drive their RV around the country and sleep in Walmart parking lots, not the kind who take $500,000 trips on a billionaire's dime. Anyway, never mind that the whole issue highlights the need for a Supreme Court code of ethics, of which there is currently none. Now, we also know that since Mercury stationed retrograde in Taurus on April 21st following this eclipse, and perhaps there are more entities now in the media industry and elsewhere who are reviewing Supreme Court justices' finances and tax returns, that Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch is also being accused of having sold a property of his and not disclosing the buyer. According to the New York Times on April 25th, quote, 1 month after Neil Gorsuch was appointed to the Supreme Court in April 2017, he and two partners financially sold a vacation property they had been trying to offload for nearly 2 years. But when he reported the sale the next year, he left blank a field asking the identity of the buyer. County real estate records in Colorado show that Brian L. Duffy, the chief executive of Greenberg Traurig, a sprawling law firm that frequently has business before the court, and his wife Carrie Duffy bought the property. The buyer's identity and Justice Gorsuch's decision not to disclose it was reported earlier by Politico, and this was also on April 25th. Although experts said that the omission did not violate the law, they added that it underscored the need for ethics reforms given the intensifying scrutiny on financial entanglements at the Supreme Court and renewed calls by Democratic lawmakers for tightened rules. Now, think back to the April 11th Sun, Jupiter, and Aries cazimi, a week or so after the April 5th, 6th, again, depending on your time zone, Libra full moon, which opposed the Aries Sun, Chiron, Jupiter stellium. I talked at length about this a couple weeks ago, and I recall noting then how that full moon highlighted collective wounds around the misuse or lack of a fair justice system. So that was highlighted at that full moon, but then the following cazimi, which occurred close to the third quarter waning cycle, monthly cycle, right? That cazimi that followed helped us gain greater faith that those who've believed they were above the law will ultimately find out differently. Well, that brings us to our friend Tucker Carlson, the right-wing, bigoted, misogynist, white nationalist, former Fox News host, who was fired on the day after the transiting Taurus North Node met the Sun on April 24th. Now, in my opinion, this particular conjunction pushes us, because everything that happens at the North Node is an opportunity to move toward it, right? It pushes us to evolve further away from patriarchy and toward peace, harmony, and self-love, which is espoused by the archetypal feminine divine, which is inherent in Venus-ruled Taurus. So combined with Mercury retrograde in Taurus now until May 14th, this particular energy allows us to review what this solar eclipse revealed and to rethink more practical future options concerning what we value most. And again, we usually boil down what we value most to, 4 major categories. I mean, there can be others, and I'm happy to include them, but they're relationships, finances, career, and those two are often intertwined, and health. Now, the Taurus Sun sextiled Saturn in Pisces, while Venus and Gemini sextiled wounded healer Chiron in Aries on April 25th, helping ground us to be able to work responsibly toward healing this past pain. And, as I said, that last full moon, Libra full moon, highlighted our woundedness in the area of fairness and justice, morality, and ethics. Jupiter is related. Jupiter rules naturally the 9th house, and these things are all included in the 9th house. It's the justice system. It's the expansion of our consciousness as human beings to recognize that that we need laws in order to keep a morally just society, right, from devolving into Sodom and Gomorrah. So when we are carrying out those laws justly, everything is fine. But when we're starting to find loopholes or ways to evade the law, then we have some problems, because those who do so clearly believe they're above the law, and that means that they have a tragic flaw, and that their tragic flaw is arrogance, right? Now, Mars in Cancer square to Chiron, wounded healer Chiron on April 27th, invited us to do exactly what the Sun sextile Saturn and Venus square Chiron helped us, to ground the ability to work, as I said, responsibly towards healing our past pain. But the way that the Mars square Chiron can help us to do that is to guide us to confront any inner anger so that we might express it in healthier ways going forward. And we also experienced the April 19th or 20th solar eclipse's waxing first quarter fixed square of the Leo moon to the Taurus sun, which I mentioned before, which asked us to have courage to push through any resistance, again, either inner or outer, to making change happen now. However, change likely becomes easier when Mars in Cancer sextiles Uranus and Taurus April 29th, bringing new revelations about old wounds and hurts that can change our perspectives positively for the future. In short, new viewpoints may result in greater practical changes now. And when Pluto stations retrograde at 0 degrees and 21 minutes of Aquarius on May 1st, the Lord of the Underworld invites us to dig deeply into our subconscious and excavate any fears around implementing change for the future. You see how things are pointing towards change. Meanwhile, when the Taurus sun meets Mercury retrograde later that day, that's May 1st, we continue to review either existing or brand new plans with a much clearer understanding of our real, true future needs. So since the sun traditionally represents an important person and Mercury represents communication, it's likely we may hear announcements from important persons. In fact, and you guys who listen to this podcast regularly know that I already talk a lot about how things may occur more sometimes while these aspects are waxing than they do at the actual perfection of the aspect. So what we've seen so far is U.S. President Joe Biden's April 26th announcement, as we're moving towards the May 1st Sun Mercury retrograde. And remember, Mercury retrograde, right? This isn't the first time that Joe Biden announced he's running for president. And I don't mean in 2023 or 2022. I mean back in 2019 and 2020, which is, of course, when he won the election. So he's announced again, he's repeating his behavior with Mercury retrograde, that he's made an important decision and he's communicating it to all of us. Now, it'll be important to remember, however, to take care not to shun reality and instead choose to view the world through rose-colored glasses and or fantastical wishful thinking when Venus in Gemini forms a mutable square to Neptune in Pisces on May 4th. Venus in Gemini sextiles Jupiter in Aries then too, and we may, perhaps mistakenly, out of a sense of inspired generosity, right? These are the lesser and the greater benefic, as they were known in traditional astrology. So normally this would be considered a very, very positive aspect, because a sextile is usually an opportunity, and of course for some of us it may well be. But it follows so hard on the heels of Venus square Neptune that we may see the best in people through the distortive view of those same rose-colored glasses. Now, I'm actually not one, to go back to Biden's announcement and these aspects following that, right? We haven't hit their perfection yet, but they're waxing now. And I'm not one who believes that Biden is too old to run again, though normally I would say he was too old to run again. But if it's Trump that he'll end up running against, the choice is obvious, at least in my opinion. Biden's a seasoned politician, and I believe his stutter is mistaken as senility, as it's often been weaponized against him by those who oppose him. As my Aquarius sun father used to say, quote, elections are always a choice between the lesser of two evils. And I say, if it's Biden versus Trump, I don't think you can make a case against this supposition or belief. So, bear in mind, though, that between now and the Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse on May 5th, we're undoubtedly set up for more shocks and surprises, because as the sun waxes toward an exact conjunction to Uranus in Taurus, the Scorpio moon opposes them both at this lunation. And as the Scorpio moon opposes the Taurus sun, it reveals Taurus's shadow side, which is a stubborn resistance to change. So again, there's so much in the ethers here about change. The two Aries new moons within 1 month, and now this Scorpio lunar eclipse with the Scorpio moon opposing the Taurus sun. Now, the Scorpio moon opposite Uranus in Taurus can make us feel jittery, nervous, anxious, or perhaps feel the need to break free from someone or something. However, since the sun joins Uranus in Taurus at this particular lunation, though not exact yet, the question becomes, will something sudden, some event or incident that shocks, surprises, or possibly even traumatizes us, Uranus in modern psychological and evolutionary astrology often represents a trauma signature. The Uranus and Aquarius, depending, it's not a given. I'm just saying that this is, when we're looking at natal charts, we can see trauma here. That this Sun Uranus conjunction can cause us to react rebelliously, or perhaps some other way unpredictably, not in accordance with our normal nature. So as we wax towards these energies, it's probably best not to leap to conclusions or to throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes. But remember, forewarned is forearmed. Remember, too, we're asked to review what we value most during the current Mercury retrograde. So while any sudden events or changes may well influence us to act more spontaneously, or read differently than usual, or that we were previously prepared for, the end result, though it may shake us up initially, is designed in tandem with Uranus's mantra that the only constant is change. Okay, I'd like to switch gears slightly here now, although not entirely, because we're on the subject of eclipses. And in honor of this spring's 2023 eclipse season, I thought it'd be interesting to look at a couple of charts more closely. And by that I mean Clarence Thomas and Tucker Carlson's natal charts, some of their natal aspects, and where last year and this year's eclipses have and will hit them. So first let's look at Clarence Thomas, who was born on June 23rd, 1948 at 9 p.m. in Pinpoint, Georgia. That's two words, pin and separate word point, Georgia. And he comes out with a Cancer sun at 2 degrees in the 6th house, conjunct Mercury at 2 degrees in the 6th house, conjunct Venus at 3 degrees, all of Cancer in the 6th house. So this is a Virgo, because the 6th house is ruled by Mercury's Virgo, and a Moon Cancer mix. Right? So someone who feels strongly that perhaps the devil is in the details. He has an 1 degree, 23 minute Aquarius moon in the 1st house, just underneath a 25 degree, 9 minute Capricorn rising. So what's interesting about him too is that he has an 11 degree, it's really very close, well, it's actually in, because it's regressing, it's in the 9th house. He is, after all, a lawyer, and the 9th house is the house of law. That south node in Scorpio is at 11 degrees and 22 minutes, and obviously opposite a 3rd house, Taurus, 11 degree, 22 minute north node. So the first thing that we know is that on April 30th of 2022, his north node was hit by the 10 degree, 28 minute Taurus solar eclipse. All right, and that was in his 3rd house, and in his 10th house, he had the 25 Scorpio 18-minute lunar eclipse. All right, so what's important here is that the north node in his chart was hit by the eclipse, the solar eclipse, the theme of which was, as I outlined last week, ailing father figures. Okay? There's a who's your daddy kind of connotation there, right? And I think for Clarence Thomas, looking at it symbolically, it's like, okay, so who's your daddy? Is it that billionaire guy? Or are you the main man, right? So we're looking at that a little metaphorically. Now, on October 25th, we had the solar eclipse. This is 2022 at 2 degrees of Scorpio, which fell in his 9th house. This was a year ago, but what's interesting right now is that his progressed moon and his progressed Mars, they weren't here a year ago, but they are now, are at 2 degrees and 12 minutes, exact conjoined as of April 28th or April 29th, in his 9th house of law, right? And they're headed for, the progressed moon is about 8-9 months away from conjoining his south node. And that south node, when the progressed moon hits the south node, we're going to look at where it's going to resonate most. We look at where the natal moon is. Trouble starts with this guy's appearance, okay? How does he appear to the world? 1st house moon. What is he about? What does he look like? What does he represent? And it will, whatever repercussions, the situation starts with his persona, right? His appearance. And it will play out in the ninth house, which is his Supreme Court justiceness, and the repercussions will be felt in the sixth house and the seventh house, because those two houses are moon ruled. He has Cancer on the cusp of both. Sixth house is the house of work and service, and seventh is the house of partnership. Now, I am not making any predictions, but what I'm going to say, and the same thing rings true for Tucker Carlson, who we'll get to in a minute. The deal here is that on October 25th of 2022, that solar eclipse hit at 2 degrees exact of Scorpio. And the transiting nodes in the sky are going to hit that point in July. No, hang on a second. Let me double check that. Sorry, that date is June 23rd. So I've mentioned before that I follow Ronnie Dreyer, who I think is a marvelous astrologer, and that she talks about the degrees of the eclipses becoming sensitized. So my point in pointing out that Clarence Thomas's progressed moon and Mars, and together they can motivate you, they can make you ambitious, they can make you assertive, or they can make you overly assertive, overly ambitious, overly aggressive, and really, really angry. Now they are trining his Sun and his Mercury and his Venus, but the ruler of that sixth house naturally is Mercury, and Mercury is currently retrograde. So there's a lot here, because the other thing is that his progressed moon and Mars are still within orb of squaring his natal moon. So there's a lot going on for this guy. That's the whole point. But the other thing is that, so when the transiting nodes in the sky hit that 2 degree exact Scorpio, right? That's the south node. They are going to, that's a sensitized degree that, because it's resonating in Clarence Thomas's natal chart by virtue of squaring his natal moon and trining his Sun, Mercury, Venus, but also beginning to wax towards his ninth house south node. And that south node is... Scorpio South Node is ruled by Pluto, and Pluto Scorpio rules his 10th house, and that's his career, right? So whether we're seeing the slow demise of his career or not, I am not going to predict. But the other thing that's really interesting about his chart is that transiting Pluto, which on May 1st is going to station retrograde at 0 degrees, 21 minutes of Aquarius, is in his first house. It was just about, and it is just about, a degree away from conjoining his natal moon at 1 degree 23 Aquarius. So Pluto is going to retrograde and then go back into Capricorn and then come back into Pluto. And I don't have the date on when it will actually hit his moon, but that will be sometime either, I think it won't be until sometime next year, so we'll check that out. But meanwhile, his natal moon is quincunx his Sun and his Mercury and Venus. So whether it's now or it's later, in about a year's time, give or take, Clarence Thomas will be hit, his moon will be hit by Pluto, and his Sun and his Mercury and his Venus will be quincunxed by Pluto. So, Pluto is always about change or be changed. The quincunx of the moon to his Sun natally is that his heart and his mind need some kind of adjustment. They're not exactly in correct alignment. The logic versus the emotion, they're not in kilter, or they're off kilter, right? So when Pluto comes back to actually aspect these exact, it's going to set that into motion even more. It'll highlight it, it will trigger it. So I'm just giving everybody a heads up. It may take a long time, so we have to be patient. Now let's turn to Tucker Carlson, partly in honor of Mercury retrograde in Taurus, because he's a double Taurus with both his Sun and Moon in the sign of the stubborn bull. And I'll get into it in a minute. You'll see. where Mercury factors in. But first of all, Carlson was born on May 16th, 1969 at 8:07 a.m. in San Francisco, California, with his 25 degree and 38 minute Taurus sun conjunct his 29 degree 42 minute Taurus moon in his 11th house, opposing his 5th house 27 degree 23 minute Neptune in Scorpio. So first of all, he's a waxing he's a waxing new moon, right? The sun and the moon came together. The moon passed the sun, so it's just passed. So he's a new moon. A lot of times that also is we have to feel our way in the dark, right? Because the two luminaries are so close to each other, you can't really see much, right? The new moon is when there's no light in the sky. Anyway, I rather like the way the Solar Fire computer-generated natal report delineates the range of potential energetic possibilities for these two aspects, the Sun opposite Neptune and the Moon opposite Neptune. And I'll let you be the judge. But the Sun opposite Neptune is spelled out by the computer thusly, quote, "You allow other people to tell you how to live your life because of your own lack of confidence. You have a pleasing nature and wouldn't dream of upsetting other people. Your challenge is to use your artistic and sensitive nature for the benefit of other people without losing yourself. Spending time on your own could be helpful." And the Moon opposite Neptune is explained this way, quote, "You are drawn to unusual people. Positively, these people may be spiritual and artistic, or negatively, they may be confused and drunk. You may idealize other people and need to be more realistic. The conflict is that you want to be at one with the universe and yet cannot be until you have a clear idea of your identity. The lesson is to recognize your own artistic and spiritual potential." Now, this particular aspect, the Sun opposite Neptune, is somewhat classic in terms, well, that was the moon, but the first one, the Sun opposite Neptune, in somewhat, this aspect is somewhat classic in terms of psychological astrology because it indicates that a person has difficulty developing a strong sense of ego identity based on one's relationship with their father or their father figure, whoever that might be. And what backs this up for Carlson, again, on a potentially hidden, deeper psychological level, read an unconscious level, because A, Neptune is the planet of unconscious, and B, because every opposition represents relationship. And normally, and this is according to psychological astrology, we recognize one side of the opposition, but not the other, and that is the unconscious portion. So we project out what we repress or don't, or refuse to recognize or don't recognize, and it comes at us in the form of other people, which is why a moon opposite Neptune might attract either spiritually conscious people or total, I'm not going to say it, but total drunkards, right? People who are completely confused. So I thought this was so interesting because what backs this up specifically for Carlson is that his own father was an orphan. And as per Wikipedia, and I quote, Carlson's paternal grandparents were Richard Boynton and Dorothy Anderson, who were teenagers when they placed his father at the Home for Little Wanderers orphanage, where he was fostered by Carl Moberger of Malden, near Boston, a tannery worker of Swedish descent, and his wife Florence Moberger. Carlson's father was adopted at the age of 2 by upper-middle-class New Englanders, the Carlsons, an executive at the Winslow Brothers and Smith Tannery of Norwood, the oldest tannery in America, and his wife. Carlson's maternal great-great-grandfather, Caesar Lombardi, immigrated to New York from Switzerland in 1860. Carlson is also a distant relative of Massachusetts politicians Ebenezer R. Hoare and George M. Brooks, and is a great-great-great-grandson to Californian rancher Henry Miller. Carlson himself was named after his great-great-great-grandfather, Dr. J.C. Tucker, and his great-great-grandfather, George W. McNear. Carlson is of English, German, and 1/16 Swiss-Italian ancestry. End quote. Meanwhile, again, according to psychological astrology, his Moon-Neptune opposition can indicate a loss or sense of abandonment, either emotional or physical or both, by the mother. The moon is usually female, and usually someone in the family, and if it's not the mother, it's some other female. But in this case, for Carlson, mother turns out to be accurate. Again, from Wikipedia, quote, in 1976, remember he was born in 60, what did I say? He was born in 68. No, 69? He was born in 69. So 76, he's about 7, right? I think he was 6 or something when it happened. But it says in 1976, Carlson's parents divorced after the 9-year marriage reportedly, quote, turned sour. Carlson's father was granted custody of Tucker and his brother. Carlson's mother left the family when he was 6, wanting to pursue a bohemian lifestyle. It would seem that Carlson's moon in the 11th house might, and that's an end of that quote, so I'm saying this, it would seem that Carlson's moon in the 11th might indicate his biological mother's, quote, bohemian nature, as Wikipedia puts it, which was clearly strong enough for her to choose an alternative lifestyle, 11th house is ruled by Uranus, over that of sticking around to mother him. The fact that Carlson's a Taurus moon might indicate, though I have no first-hand proof of this, that all was fairly stable in his world, in his mind and his emotions, until she suddenly vacated. You know, after all, a shock to a change-resistant fixed Taurus type might be more of a shock than to some other less fixed personality types. However, a few years later, in 1979, which would have made him, I guess, about 10, Carlson's father married divorcee Patricia Caroline Swanson, an heiress to Swanson Enterprises, daughter of Gilbert Carl Swanson and niece of Senator J. William Fulbright. Though Patricia remained a beneficiary of the family fortune, the Swansons had sold the brand to the Campbell Soup Company in 1955 and did not own it by the time Carlson's father's marriage. Carlson's, that's Tucker, has a 24-degree, 13-minute Cancer rising. And as many of us who've studied basic astrology know, a moon-ruled ascendant is often someone who's got antennae that reach out into the atmosphere. This can make someone extremely intuitive, but also a person who may recoil when what those antennae sense feels dangerous or hurtful, or emotionally upsetting. So one only has to view a few clips from Carlson's Fox News broadcasts, where, of course, he was immensely popular with those who related to his nativist, emotional, self-protective, in the "I'm also protecting you, my friends" rhetoric about how the world is one big war of us against them. Such an orientation can fit, not saying for everyone, but it can fit a Cancer rising because, as I've noted before, when we're discussing the archetype of the moon-ruled Cancer, we turn the dial on sensitive automatically up to maximum. And again, it doesn't take much to witness Carlson's emotional nature, complete with occasional emotional outbursts, which some of us find annoyingly off-putting, but which others obviously, with which others obviously feel or felt in alignment. In fact, as he's now verbalized, his revealed text, "I hate Trump," passionately, was said in a fit of emotional pique, which is just as I suspected. And I think I might have said this last week. I mean, think of a child lashing out temporarily after you've taken away his toy because he just hit his brother. "I hate you, Mommy." might be what such a child would yell or mutter or whisper, depending on the rest of their nature. Once calm, however, the child will take it all back in a heartbeat because he knows he didn't really mean it. He was just overcome by the emotion of the moment. So we have an abandoned child because his mother disappeared, choosing to live a lifestyle free of children rather than remain committed to them. And Carlson has a younger brother. I think he's 2 years younger too. So we can see the Taurus sun, the ego persona, and the moon, the emotions, which ordinarily crave stability, physical contact, and the known, the dependable known, being forced to face the unknown in the naturally Uranian ruled 11th house. Now you see her, now you don't. I would argue was his experience when at that young age, and no matter how much warning a child may have, he woke up one day and his mother was gone. So, there's a lot more here that I'm not going to have time to cover, but he also has a third house south node in Virgo. Now, third house is naturally ruled by Mercury's Gemini, and the south node in Virgo naturally ruled by Mercury. And Mercury is now retrograde, as I pointed out before about Clarence Thomas's chart. And his Mercury in his sixth house, which is conjunct his Sun and his Venus, and quincunx by his Moon. But, there is a lot of adaptability here that has happened in Carlson's past life, having to kind of move rapidly, both mentally and physically. So when you take the combination of the third house, which is the near neighborhood, I always liken it to the dog chasing its tail, or someone wandering around their neighborhood searching for an outlet, someone in a labyrinth, like, where am I going? Where am I going? You keep going over the same ground, but you can't find a way out. You can't find a way forward. You can't get in a helicopter and go above and look down and see the big picture. You can only see... Oh, sorry for that pause. I thought that my recorder was turned off. Anyway, so I've been going on and on, but the point I want to get to, too, before I run out of time, because I only have a couple minutes left, is that, Carlson is adaptable. That Gemini South node, that Virgo South node in the Gemini house, he likes to talk a lot. It's ruled by Mercury in his 11th house, which is opposed to his Sagittarius Mars in the 5th house. Sagittarius Mars, is a raconteur. They like to tell tall tales, perhaps. And Mercury opposite Mars can be argumentative. So despite his Taurian nature, which is still kind of in the 11th house, freedom-closeness dilemma, right? And that may very well hark back to his relationship with his mother, who abandoned him. I want to be close to her. Oh my God, she's gone. How do I get close to you? Are you going to disappear? Now, he does have a long-term wife, but his attitude towards women clearly is, I think the best word I could use for someone with a Cancer rising would be, let me think a second. Oh yeah, immature. We all know by now about his pictures of Nancy Pelosi in a bathing suit on his office walls with a plunging, neckline and his attitude just in general. He's misogynist, obviously. So in any case, just to skip ahead a little bit and look at his chart, what I want to point out about him is similar to what I pointed out about Clarence Thomas, but he has in his 9th house, Tucker Carlson, a 2-degree Saturn in hold on a second. I'm just getting his chart up because I thought I had it up already, but I didn't. Okay, hang on. His Saturn is at 2 degrees and 4 minutes of Taurus in the 10th house. So last October, he took a direct hit, an opposition from the October 25th 2 degree Scorpio eclipse in his 4th house. All right, it's almost like saying, E.T. go home. Anyway, someone who has Saturn in the 10th often feels judged by other people. And so as an automatic unconscious response, they tend to judge others first. So if in past life karma you were judged a lot, perhaps even sentenced to death, say for example through some kind of public shaming, which is not unheard of with a south node in the 3rd house, which is also flanked by Uranus in the beginning of Libra, but also by a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, we can see that this might have triggered some kind of reaction that is coming home to roost now again by June 23rd, as this sensitized 2 degree Scorpio degree. I'm winging it now, but I do know what I'm talking about, is going to hit on June 23rd. So it will be interesting to see, obviously, whether this is a fallen star whose time is over, or whether he will be, coming back into visibility or not. But it still, I think, is the occurrences of his firing and these revelations about Clarence Thomas, that they are chickens coming home to roost. And as I mentioned before, Donald Trump, which has like about, I don't know, a couple million chickens that are due to still come home to roost, that we'll be seeing some of the repercussions, particularly for these two gentlemen, Thomas and Carlson, when, or between now, I mean, we've already seen some of it. So it'll be interesting to see if there's anything more by the time June 23rd rolls around, or, in the interim. So anyway, thank you everyone for joining me again today. And I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on May 5th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go.